Daniel Mercer had never expected anything from his grandfather, not a single dollar, not a story, not a hug. So when the lawyer handed him a manila envelope with the words, Walter E. Mercer, estate transfer printed on the front, he blinked at it like it was a misdelivered package. "It's the garage," the lawyer said, tapping the edge of the envelope, "down on Bay Street near the old rail yard." Daniel stared at him. "That place still exists. It's yours now." By the time Daniel got to his truck, the envelope was crumpled in one hand, keys jingling in the other. Abby sat in the passenger seat, legs tucked under her, her sketch pad resting on her knees. She glanced at the keys, then at her dad. "What garage?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. The engine turned over with a low grumble, like it was waking up in a bad mood. He pulled onto the road, squinting into the low Duluth sun, thinking how cold the city still felt in April, no matter what the calendar said. "Grandpa Walter's old place," he finally said. "The one he used to run before I was even born, near the tracks." "The haunted-looking one?" Abby asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel smirked. "That's the one?" The drive home was quiet. Abby went back to sketching something abstract, sharp lines and floating shapes. Daniel focused on the road, but his mind drifted. He hadn't seen the inside of that garage since he was 12. Walter had stopped letting anyone in after his grandmother died. Kept it locked, kept to himself. When the man passed 2 months ago, there wasn't even a funeral. Just a notice in the paper. No photos, no stories, just a date. Now this. A key. A deed. A legacy no one had asked for. Back at the house, Daniel tossed the envelope on the kitchen counter like it had burned his hand. Abby stood by the fridge chewing her thumbnail. "Are we going to see it eventually?" She tilted her head. "You mean you're going to try to sell it?" "Yeah," he said flatly. "That's the plan." She nodded too fast. "Okay." Daniel could see the disappointment slip into her shoulders before she turned down the hallway. He heard her door close, gently, never slammed, never angry. Just quiet. The silence after reminded him how much space they didn't fill anymore. Just 2 people in a 3-bedroom house that still smelled like a life that wasn't theirs anymore. He looked back at the envelope. That night he dreamed of his grandfather's hands. Grease-stained, thick-knuckled, always moving wiring, fixing, unscrewing. Never still. But in the dream, Walter wasn't fixing anything. He was just standing in the garage doorway watching Daniel with something unreadable in his eyes. Daniel woke before dawn. Sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, rubbing a palm over his face. Maybe he just needed to get it over with. He left Abby a note and a grocery list, knowing she'd be up within an hour anyway. He packed a thermos of coffee, grabbed the keys, and drove. Bay Street hadn't changed much. The tracks still sat rusting behind chain-link fences. A few metal shops and plumbing companies hung on like the buildings themselves refused to die. And then there it was, Walter's garage. Same faded lettering on the sign, Mercer Auto and Repair, barely visible through decades of grime. The paint was peeling. The overhead door was covered in dust and bird droppings. A busted light fixture hung by a single wire over the entry. It looked like the last place you'd want to walk into alone. Daniel stepped out of the truck, paused, and let the cold bite his neck. The key turned with a scrape of resistance. He pushed open the smaller side door. The smell hit him first. Oil, dust, dry air, and old rubber. It was like stepping into a time capsule. He clicked on the flashlight app on his phone and scanned the space. Everything was still there. The tool benches, the metal cabinets, a pegboard wall lined with antique wrenches and socket sets. Under a heavy tarp, the silhouette of a car, probably something from the 60s, judging by the shape. But the silence was what unnerved him most. It didn't feel empty. It felt paused. He took a few steps inside, boots echoing. Dust stirred in the beam of his light. At the back wall, there was a row of lockers, each one labeled with fading tape. The last locker bore his grandfather's initials, W.E.M. He hesitated. Then he opened it. Inside, tucked among old coveralls and a cracked thermos, sat a wooden box. No lock, just a clasp. Daniel reached for it slowly, unsure why his hands felt colder than the air. He opened it. A stack of yellowing envelopes bound in twine. On top, a small photograph, black and white, curling at the corners. In it, Walter stood beside a woman Daniel didn't recognize. Not Helen, his grandmother. Younger, softer. Her hand rested on Walter's shoulder like she belonged there. In her arms, a baby. Their faces blurred with time. Daniel sat back on his heels. He flipped the photo over. On the back, in faint pencil. Summer 1964, everything changed. His breath caught, not from drama, but confusion. What was this? He picked up the first envelope, written in his grandfather's sharp, mechanical hand, "For the day you need to understand." Daniel leaned against the locker, heart thudding. His eyes landed on the truck under the tarp. A strange feeling bloomed in his chest. He couldn't name it, but it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Like the story hadn't started here. Like he was arriving in the middle of something long buried, but not forgotten. And somehow it was his turn to finish it. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, the photograph from the garage lying between his hands, like something that might disappear if he blinked too fast. The steam from his coffee curled upward, silent and slow, but his thoughts were racing. That woman, that child. The box of letters was still in the truck, unopened. He hadn't been ready to read them last night. He wasn't sure he was ready now. Abby walked in hair tangled, wearing her oversized sweatshirt that said, "Some mornings should be optional." She glanced at the photo without much interest, then reached for a banana. "You went to the garage," she said, like it was just another Tuesday. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. Early." Was it weird? He looked at her, this 12-year-old who sometimes sounded like she was twice that. "Yeah," he said quietly. Yeah, it was. She peeled the banana halfway, watching him. "Are you going to keep it?" "I don't know yet." She chewed a bite, then tilted her head. "It doesn't sound like you hated it." Daniel paused. He wanted to say it didn't matter, that he didn't have time to get sentimental about an old pile of bricks and oil stains, but that wasn't quite true. "I didn't," he admitted. "I thought I would, but something's there," she said, finishing for him. He nodded again, eyes dropping to the photo. "Yeah, something's there." They both looked at it in silence. By 10, Daniel was downtown, walking toward a storefront he hadn't entered in years. Colfax Restoration and Antiques. His boots echoed against the old hardwood floors as he stepped inside. The air smelled like cedar wax and something old and sweet, maybe dried lavender. Light spilled through tall windows, catching on hanging stained glass pieces, and vintage china arranged like it was waiting for someone from another time to come in and claim it. "Be right with you," a woman's voice called from the back. He recognized it instantly. A moment later, Marianne Colfax appeared, wiping her hands on a linen cloth. Her hair, long and silvered at the edges, was twisted into a loose braid over one shoulder. She wore jeans, a soft chambray shirt, and an expression that didn't hide surprise. "Daniel Mercer," she said. Well, that's unexpected. He hadn't seen her in over a year, not since the school fundraiser where they'd barely exchanged more than 5 words. She had always been friendly, sharp-eyed, quiet, but not cold. Just careful. "Hey, Marianne," he said. I have something I was hoping you could help me identify. You mean something you found in the garage?" Her eyes were already narrowed with curiosity. His brows lifted. "That obvious small town," she replied with a wry smile. Word gets around. He pulled the photo from his jacket pocket and handed it over. She took it gently, like it might tear if she breathed too hard. "Do you know who she is?" he asked. She stared at it for a long moment. "No," she said slowly. "But that car behind them, that's a '64 Chrysler Newport. You see the trim," Daniel squinted. "Huh. I wouldn't have caught that." Marianne looked up at him, eyes sharper now. "Why do you have this?" "It was in the garage," he said, "in a box, along with a stack of letters. My name was on the envelope." Her lips pressed together, thoughtful. Walter never mentioned her, never Daniel said. He barely talked about anything. She handed the photo back. Maybe he was saving it for the right moment. "I'm not sure this feels like the right one," he muttered. Marianne tilted her head. "Well, he's gone. You're the only one who can decide what to do with it." Daniel slipped the photo back into his pocket. He wasn't sure why, but her words felt heavier than they should have. "You ever think about how much we don't know about the people who raise us?" he asked, half to himself. "All the time," she said, folding the linen cloth and setting it aside. "And it gets worse the older you get." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, shared history, unspoken understanding, the weight of family stories left untold. She gave him a soft look. "If you need help going through the rest of what you found, let me know," she said. "Some things are easier with someone who's not related." Daniel nodded. "Thanks. I might take you up on that." Back at home, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, gold and long and slanting. Daniel found Abby on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket sketchbook in her lap. She was drawing the garage. Not how it looked now, but how it might have looked once, windows unbroken, the sign, clean light spilling out from inside. He leaned on the post behind her. "That's pretty good." She didn't look up. "It's not done yet." He watched her pencil move, deliberate, confident. "I talked to Marianne today," he said. "She owns the antique shop downtown." "I know who she is," Abby said softly. "I brought her the photo. Thought she might know something. She didn't. But she might help us figure out the rest." Abby paused, pencil still. "Are you going to open the letters?" He took a long breath. "Yeah, I think I need to." She nodded, then looked up at him. "Can I be there when you do?" Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure what the letters would say, what kind of truth they'd carry, but something in Abby's face, a steadiness beyond her years, made the decision simple. "Yeah," he said. "You can." That night after dinner and dishes, they sat on the living room floor. Daniel untied the twine from the stack of envelopes. The top one had no date, just 3 words on the front, "To my grandson." He unfolded the letter slowly, his hands suddenly not quite steady. Abby leaned in, waiting. Daniel cleared his throat. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I never got the courage to say what needed saying while I was alive. And I'm sorry for that. Some men are better with tools than words. I was one of them." The paper trembled slightly in Daniel's hands. "I left you the garage not because it was valuable, but because it holds something more than rust. It holds decisions I made, and one I couldn't. There are people connected to that place who deserve the truth, even if it's hard." Daniel looked at Abby, who was watching him quietly, her eyes wide. He continued. "If you're willing, you'll find the rest in time. If not, lock the door again and walk away. Either path is yours. But I always believed you'd do the right thing." Walter Daniel exhaled slowly. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Abby whispered, "What do you think he meant by the rest?" "I don't know," Daniel said. but I think it's waiting for us." He looked at her. "And I don't think I want to walk away." The following morning, Daniel stood in the middle of the garage again, the scent of old oil and thyme settling into his lungs. Light filtered through high, dust-smeared windows, cutting through shadows like memory itself was waking up. He turned slowly in place, eyes tracing the rusted cabinet handles, the faded blueprint pinned to a corkboard. This wasn't just a workspace, it had been someone's world, his grandfather's world, one that had been closed off from everyone for years. And now it was his. "Okay," he muttered to the silence. "Let's see what else you didn't say." He made his way to the workbench along the back wall, running his fingers across its pitted surface. There was a drawer that wouldn't open, stuck fast. He tugged again. "Nothing. I could help with that," a voice called behind him. Daniel flinched, then turned to find Marianne Colfax standing in the doorway holding a bag of pastries and a thermos. "I knocked," she added, stepping in. "Twice." Daniel let out a breath. "Sorry, I was lost in my own head. I figured you'd be back here today," she said, looking around. "This place has a pull, doesn't it?" He nodded. "It really does." Marianne set the bag and thermos down on the nearest flat surface. "I brought coffee and something called a cinnamon peach twist. The bakery lady swore it would change my life." Daniel smirked. "That's a bold promise." She smiled softly, but then her gaze drifted around the room. Her expression grew distant, thoughtful. "I haven't been in here since, I don't know, before Helen passed, I guess." "Walter never liked visitors." "No," Daniel said. He didn't. They both stood there for a moment, surrounded by quiet and the creak of old wood settling. Then Marianne walked toward the truck beneath the tarp, pulling the edge of the cover back. "Is this his old pickup? I think so," Daniel said. "It's in better shape than I expected. Might even run if I could get a new battery in it." She nodded, circling it slowly. He used to drive it down to the lumber yard every Saturday. Always wore a hat with a feather tucked into the band. Said it was lucky. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. He said that she grinned. Once. After that, I think he kept it in just to make Helen roll her eyes. He laughed genuine low in his chest. It surprised him how easy it was to laugh with her. She stopped near the driver's side door. "Have you looked inside?" "Not yet." Marianne motioned toward it. "May I?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Be my guest." She opened the door carefully. The hinges groaned, but the door swung wide. Dust floated in a shaft of sunlight as Marianne reached in and pulled something from the glove compartment. A small, worn notebook, bound in leather with Walter's initials pressed into the front. Daniel felt his breath catch. "I think this is for you," Marianne said quietly, holding it out. He took it, ran his fingers across the cover. It was heavier than it looked. He opened to the first page. Walter's handwriting. Careful, mechanical, each word measured. "This place is more than walls and tools. It's the last thing I couldn't explain to the people I loved. If you're reading this, maybe you're the one who finally will." Daniel closed the book. He couldn't read it yet. Not here. Not with the weight of all this pressing in. He looked at Marianne. "Why are you helping me?" She looked almost surprised by the question. Then her voice softened. "Because I've been the one left with questions before, and I know what it feels like when no one helps you find the answers." Their eyes held for a moment too long. Daniel looked away first. "Thank you. Really?" She smiled gently. "You're welcome." Later that afternoon, Daniel stood at the high school, leaning against the hood of his truck, watching students filter out toward the buses. He spotted Abby backpack slung over one shoulder, talking with her friend Macy. When she reached him, she looked up, squinting. You okay? He nodded, still holding the notebook under one arm. Yeah, just thinking. Abby looked at the book. More secrets. Probably. She waited a beat. Want to talk about it? He looked at her, this girl who was part him, part her mother, and all her own. Not yet, he said. But soon. Abby nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. They rode home in comfortable silence, windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of spring thaw and distant pine. That night after Abby went to bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table again, the leather notebook in front of him. A single lamp lit the space, casting long shadows on the walls. He opened the second page. There was a woman named Ruth. Not your grandmother, someone else. I met her during the war. We were young, scared, and desperate to believe in something good. She was married unhappily. Her husband never came back. But she did. Daniel leaned back in his chair, heart picking up. This wasn't just a confession. This was a door. We tried to build something after the war, but I was already tied to another life. By the time I had the courage to choose her, it was too late. She had a child. I never knew if he was mine. But I made sure they were taken care of. Quietly. The garage was how. Daniel sat perfectly still. He looked down at the last line on the page. I wanted to tell you, Daniel. I really did. I just didn't know how to say I'd lived 2 lives. The page trembled in his hand. He didn't know what hurt more, that Walter had never said any of this aloud, or that he'd carried it in silence for decades. Daniel closed the book. A knock on the door broke the stillness. He opened it to find Marianne holding a Tupperware dish and wearing a hesitant smile. I made too much soup, she said. Thought maybe you hadn't eaten? Daniel stepped aside. You have good timing. They sat across from each other again, the way people do when they aren't sure what they are to each other yet, but know it's something. You look like you saw a ghost, she said. He nodded towards the notebook. Might as well have. She didn't ask questions. Just sipped her soup quietly. That silence, the safe kind, was something Daniel hadn't realized he missed. After a while, he looked up. I think he was trying to make peace before he was gone. Marianne met his eyes. Then maybe that's your job now. He didn't say anything. Just nodded slowly. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was doing this alone. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The following Saturday morning came dressed in fog, soft and low over Duluth, like a blanket that hadn't quite settled. Daniel stood at the entrance to the garage holding the same brass key that had started all of this, now worn warm from use. Abby was beside him, bundled in her navy puffer jacket, gripping a thermos with both hands. You ready for this? He asked. She gave him a small nod, her eyes serious. Are you? He gave a half smile. Nope. He turned the lock, pushed the door open. The garage seemed quieter than usual, if that was even possible. The air inside was still and cold, and for a few seconds neither of them moved. Then Abby stepped forward, like she'd decided for both of them. They settled near the old truck. Daniel had placed a folding table in the corner and cleared space around the workbench. The notebook lay there beside a stack of Walter's unsent letters. On top of the pile was one that hadn't been there the night before. Daniel stared at it. I didn't see this one yesterday. Abby leaned in, reading aloud. To the boy who might be mine. Daniel didn't move. Abby looked up at him. Are you okay? He nodded once too fast. Yeah, but he wasn't. Not really. There was something about that sentence, those few spare words, that made everything suddenly heavier. Walter's mistakes were no longer ideas. They were real. And now Daniel might be the only person who could make them right. He reached for the letter. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside, Walter's words spilled in the same deliberate script. I never said your name aloud, never dared to. I told myself I was protecting everyone, but maybe I was protecting myself. There's a good chance I failed you. And if you're reading this, I hope you find your way here. I hope Daniel lets you in. Daniel blinked. Let's read the rest later, Abby said quietly. You look like you need air. He smiled at her gently. You're way too observant for your own good. She shrugged. You raised me. As they stepped outside, Daniel caught sight of someone approaching from across the street. A man mid-30s maybe in a brown wool coat. He walked with purpose but not urgency, like someone used to finding their way through unfamiliar places. He paused just outside the garage and removed his cap. Mr. Mercer, the man asked. Daniel felt Abby stiffen beside him. Yeah. I'm Daniel. I'm Lucas Reed. The name struck him like a chord. Lucas, the boy who might be Walter's son. The boy who might be... I think you knew my mother. Ruth. Lucas's voice was careful, measured. Daniel stepped forward. You want to come in? Lucas nodded. If that's okay? Inside, the three of them sat in a rough circle. The letter sat between them, now open. Lucas didn't touch it. He just stared at it, eyes unfocused. He really wrote this? Lucas asked. Daniel nodded. He left a stack of them. That one was on top this morning. Lucas rubbed his palms together. My mom passed last year. Cancer. Before she died, she told me there was someone I might want to meet. Someone named Walter. She never said he might be my father. Not directly. Daniel watched the man across from him, wondering what this moment must feel like for him. The letter in front of them wasn't proof. It wasn't a confession. But it was something. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this, Lucas said. Me either, Daniel replied. Abby looked between them. Maybe you both start with just talking. Lucas smiled softly. You must be Abby. She nodded. You have her eyes. Lucas's eyebrows rose. My mom's, she clarified. People always said that. Lucas looked at Daniel. She's sharp, she is. The moment hung between them. Strange fragile. Then Marianne arrived. Daniel hadn't asked her to come, but there she was standing in the open doorway with a paper bag of muffins and that same tentative grace she always carried, like she never wanted to assume too much. She paused, sensing the shift in the room. I didn't mean to interrupt. Daniel stood. No. You're okay. Lucas stood as well, offering his hand. Lucas Reed. Marianne Colfax, she said warmly. Nice to meet you. There was something about Marianne's presence that seemed to reset the room. Daniel felt his breath come easier. The walls, the silence, it all seemed less tight with her there. As they sat again, Marianne placed the muffins between them like a peace offering. I've been hearing about you, Lucas said to her. Marianne tilted her head. Good things, I hope. Mostly, he said with a grin. Abby laughed quietly, and Daniel caught the look Marianne gave her, gentle, full of something maternal. Protective. It stayed with him. They spent the next hour talking, nothing too deep, but enough. Lucas shared that he was a researcher for a regional archive in St. Paul. He'd been trying to trace family history, never expecting it to land here in a town he'd never visited, in a garage that smelled like rust and memory. When Lucas stepped out to take a phone call, Daniel stayed behind, leaning against the workbench. He's got your posture, Marianne said softly. Daniel glanced over. Don't say that yet. We don't know what any of this means. Marianne turned toward him. Maybe not. But he came. He read the letter. He didn't walk away. Daniel's voice dropped. What if he wants more than that? Then you figure it out, she said gently. Day by day. He looked at her, something rising in his chest he hadn't named in years. Not quite fear, not quite hope. I'm not good at this, he admitted. Any of it. Parenting. Opening up. Letting people in. Marianne's eyes didn't waver. Neither was Walter. Daniel swallowed. She stepped a little closer, her voice soft. But maybe that's the legacy you break. Their eyes held. The silence deepened, comfortable, then charged, then something else entirely. Daniel looked down, cleared his throat. Thanks for coming today. I didn't want you to do this alone, she said. No one should have to read that kind of truth by themselves. He nodded, quiet. When Lucas came back, and the air had shifted again. Something between the three of them now, an invisible thread pulling tighter. Daniel walked over to the pile of letters. He picked up another envelope unopened. Then looked at Lucas. You want to read the next one together? He asked. Lucas nodded. Yeah, I do. Daniel handed him the letter. Their fingers brushed. And something about the gesture, simple human, felt like the beginning of something harder than grief, but better than silence, something like healing. The next day brought unexpected sun, the kind that warmed the edges of the windows and made even the garage feel a little less haunted. Daniel stood at the old service counter polishing a metal stool that had once belonged to Walter, the rubber foot still split where it leaned too long against concrete. Behind him, Lucas flipped through the rest of the notebook. He'd slept on Daniel's couch the night before, saying he didn't feel like driving back to St. Paul just yet. Abby had offered him an extra pillow without hesitation. Daniel hadn't expected that. You know, Lucas said tapping a page your grandfather kept receipts for jobs he didn't charge for. Just wrote, paid in dignity in the corner. Daniel turned a laugh, catching in his throat. That sounds like him. Straight-faced about it too, I bet. Lucas smiled faintly. I don't think he ever expected anyone to read these pages. Maybe not. Or maybe he did. Daniel paused. Maybe he knew this would all come out eventually. Lucas looked down. He had 26 entries marked with an asterisk, all of them for the same woman. Ruth. Daniel's face shifted. That many, every one of them for appliance repair car work or house maintenance. He kept a record, but never a total. Abby entered then, holding 2 cups of coffee she'd made from the little machine Marianne had dropped off a week ago. It still leaked, but the coffee was strong and bitter, just how Daniel liked it. She handed one to Lucas. Black right. He blinked, surprised. How'd you know? She pointed at the notebook. You keep notes like someone who drinks black coffee. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Is that a thing? It is now, she said, grinning. Lucas took a sip, then leaned back on the stool. I think I need to find out more about my mother's life. What she didn't say. What she left out. Daniel nodded. Let me know how I can help. Just as Lucas was about to respond, a voice called from outside. Daniel, you in there? It was a custom. Principal Howard Lane. Mid-50s, always a bit too loud, with a mustache that never quite stayed trimmed. He walked in without waiting. There you are, Howard said. Heard the old Mercer place was open again. Figured I'd stop by. Daniel tried to smile. Didn't expect a visit. I was in the neighborhood, Howard said, eyeing the place. Looks better than I thought it would. Didn't peg you as sentimental. Daniel stiffened. I'm not. Howard glanced at Lucas. And who's this? Lucas Reed, Lucas said, offering a hand. Howard didn't shake it, just nodded. Reed. That name familiar. Lucas didn't flinch. Probably not from around here. Howard murmured. Then looked at Daniel. Listen, I wanted to chat about something. There's been buzz. Some folks are wondering what your plans are with this place. Daniel crossed his arms. I haven't made any announcements. Howard chuckled awkwardly. Well, you know how people talk. Some worry you're starting a business, competing with Ed's down the street. Others say you're fixing it up to turn it into some kind of community project. Daniel said nothing. Howard's smile tightened. Whatever it is, just make sure it doesn't interfere with your hours at the school. Wouldn't want to send the wrong message. Lucas stepped forward. He's not doing anything wrong. Howard turned slowly. I'm sorry, do I know you? Lucas didn't blink. No. But I've read more about Walter Mercer in the past 2 days than most people in this town knew in their lifetimes. Howard snorted. Well, then I hope you're enjoying your research. Daniel's jaw clenched. Howard, if this is your way of saying someone's uncomfortable with me cleaning up my family's property, maybe they should say it themselves. Howard raised both hands. Hey now, no offense meant, just keeping things smooth. He backed out with a forced grin. You have yourself a good day. The garage was quiet after he left. Lucas looked at Daniel. Is he always like that? Daniel exhaled slowly, only when he's trying to be polite. They shared a look. No need for more words. Later that evening, Daniel found himself back at Shunai, Marianne's shop. He hadn't meant to walk there, but his feet took him anyway. She was rearranging a display of old tea tins and lace runners. The store smelled like lemon balm and faint wood polish. He stood just inside the door, unsure. She looked up. Rough day. You could say that. She nodded toward the back. Come on. I've got chamomile. Daniel followed her past the shelves and into the little kitchen space she kept behind a curtain. The kettle was already warm. I had a visit from Principal Lane, he said. Marianne rolled her eyes. Let me guess. Friendly warning disguised as a neighborly check-in. Pretty much. He's just nervous about anything that smells like change. Daniel sat at the small table, hands wrapped around the ceramic mug she placed in front of him. He brought up the idea that I might be planning something with the garage. Community stuff. Helping people. Well, she said softly, are you? Daniel stared into the tea. I don't know, I hadn't planned to, but it feels like that's what the space wants. Marianne leaned against the counter, watching him. I think I'm supposed to do something with what Walter left behind, he said. But I don't know where it leads. I don't even know where it starts. Marianne came to sit across from him. Her hands rested quietly on the table. You don't need to have the whole plan, she said. You just need to take the next honest step. He looked up at her. Her eyes held his. For a moment, the rest of the room faded. I'm not great at asking for help, he said. I'm not great at waiting for people to ask, she replied. Daniel smiled. That sounds like a dangerous combination. She leaned in slightly. Or the start of something. Silence bloomed between them, soft, full of possibility. Daniel let the quiet stretch. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed the photo of Walter Ruth and the child on the table. This changes everything. Marianne studied the image, her fingers brushing the edge. Maybe not everything she said, gently. Maybe just what matters most. Outside, the wind picked up. The sign above her door creaked softly, like the building was listening in. Daniel didn't move, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't want to. The following week unfolded like a series of quiet ripples. Nothing dramatic, yet everything shifted. Daniel spent his mornings at the garage sorting through Walter's tools catalogs and old ledgers. Abby stopped by after school, sometimes sketching from the steps. Other times, sorting bolts into glass jars without being asked. Lucas came by often, too, digging into old county records, piecing together fragments of Ruth's life. He moved with a quiet intensity that reminded Daniel of someone trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. But it was Marianne's visits that unsettled Daniel the most in the best and worst ways. She brought warm bread one day, folded a checkered towel over it like it was an offering. The next day, she brought a set of old Polaroids she'd found in her attic. Photos of Walter smiling. Photos Daniel had never seen. And in every one, her presence shifted the air in the room. She made things feel possible. That was starting to scare him. Friday afternoon, the garage door was propped open to let the sun in. Daniel stood at the truck, wiping his hands with an old rag when Marianne pulled up in her dusty blue Subaru. She stepped out carrying a small cardboard box and looked around. "Where's Abby?" she asked. "Study group," Daniel said. "She'll be back by 6. Marianne nodded and held out the box. "Found this behind a false panel in one of Walter's tool cabinets." Daniel froze. "You found a false panel? I was looking for hex bolts. Found history instead." He set the rag down and took the box. It was heavier than it looked. Inside were 3 things: a tiny wooden matchbox, a folded map, and a smaller sealed envelope labeled only with a date, October 17th, 1973. Daniel looked up. "That's not the date Ruth died." "No," Marianne said. "But it is the day Walter closed the garage for 2 weeks with no explanation." Daniel swallowed. "You remember that?" "Of course I do. My dad used to get furious when his car wouldn't start and Walter was gone." He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single note in Walter's script. "Sometimes the truth doesn't get buried. It gets stored. You'll need the map. You'll know when." Daniel unfolded the map. It was hand-drawn ink, fading, but one street stood out Railroad Avenue. A narrow line curved off from it, marked with a small X beside the words "Greenhouse," "Back Shed," "Left Side." He turned it toward Marianne. "I think we're about to go digging." She nodded, a smile forming. "I brought gloves." They drove in her car. Daniel watched the town pass by familiar houses, trimmed hedges, people walking dogs and raking leaves. But now everything had a shadow, like it could be part of a story he hadn't known he was living inside. The greenhouse still stood. Peeling paint, sagging porch, but the shed out back was intact. They stood in front of it side by side, staring. "You ever break into a shed before?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking if I've lived?" He grinned, heart lightening just a little. "Fair." The door wasn't locked, just latched. Inside, the air smelled like old soil and cedar. Garden tools hung on the wall, a few rotted flower pots stacked in the corner. On the left wall behind a row of shelves, Daniel saw it, a narrow panel just slightly out of place. He pulled at it. It popped free. Behind it was a small metal tin. He opened it slowly. Inside were 4 photographs, a ring in a cloth pouch, and another letter. This one was different, creased, but written in softer ink. More fragile. He unfolded it. "Ruth asked me to keep these, not to protect her, but to protect the boy. I didn't want to say no, so I said yes. I never gave them back. I told myself it was safer that way. Now I know it was selfish. If you've found this, it means you care enough to make things right. Start by showing the ring to the boy. It was hers. She wore it every day, even when she stopped wearing her wedding band." Daniel looked at the ring, silver with a turquoise stone, set in a delicate oval. It was worn, loved. Marianne exhaled slowly beside him. He kept all of this. For decades. Daniel turned to her. He knew he'd never get to explain. He left us the pieces and hoped we'd be brave enough to put them together. "And are you?" she asked. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Back at the garage, the evening light stretched long and golden across the floor. Lucas stood near the truck, flipping through a ledger, when Daniel walked in. "We found something," Daniel said. Lucas looked up, brows raised. Daniel held out the ring and the letter. Lucas took them carefully. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally, "That's hers." Daniel's voice was quiet. "She wanted you to have it." Lucas nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you," he said, barely audible. Abby entered a few minutes later, kicking off her shoes by the door. She looked between them. "Something happened?" Daniel gave her a soft smile. "A few things. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat outside on the porch, sipping tea, watching the stars appear one by one. He heard the steps before he saw her. Marianne walked up the path, coat-wrapped, tight hair loose around her shoulders. "I figured you'd still be up," she said. He stood surprised. "What are you doing here?" She held up a small photo frame. "I forgot to give you this earlier." He took it. Inside was a picture of Walter, younger than Daniel remembered him, standing next to a vintage car. Ruth was beside him holding a baby. It looked like a candid moment caught in motion. Joy unguarded. Daniel's throat tightened. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." She stepped closer. "You're doing something good here. For Lucas, for Abby, for yourself." He met her eyes. "I'm trying." She reached up, tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. "You don't have to do it alone." The space between them felt smaller now, warmer. He reached for her hand without thinking. She didn't pull away. The silence between them said more than words ever could. And for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like he was carrying everything by himself. Sunday morning began with the kind of quiet that felt earned, the kind Daniel hadn't known in years. It was the silence of something settling like dust, finally finding its place on old wood. Abby was still asleep. The house creaked with its usual morning stretches, and the kettle on the stove whispered just before the whistle. Daniel poured himself a cup, then another for Marianne. She had fallen asleep in the armchair, still wearing her coat knees tucked beneath her. He watched her for a moment, the way her breath rose steady, the soft crease in her brow, even in sleep. Like she was never fully at ease, not even in rest. He set the cup down gently on the coffee table and walked outside, letting the door close quietly behind him. The garage stood across the yard, sunlight breaking over its roof, catching the frost that clung to the edge of the shingles. It looked less like a burden now, less like something broken. It looked like a question. And Daniel was finally ready to answer. He spent the next hour opening up the back room for the first time in years. It had been used for storage stacks of worn tires, rusted hubcaps, and boxes full of who knows what. But Daniel saw something else now. He saw benches, shelves, a table big enough for hands to gather around. By the time Marianne woke and joined him, sleeves rolled hair pulled back with an old pencil, Daniel was already sweeping out the corners. She leaned against the doorframe. "You're up early. Didn't sleep much," he said. "Thought I'd start on something that's been sitting too long." Marianne looked around the space. "You have a plan?" "Not exactly," he said. "But I've been thinking. This garage, maybe it's not just for uncovering the past. Maybe it's for building something going forward." Marianne tilted her head. "Like a shop. Like a space," he said. "For people. Maybe high school kids who don't want to take college classes but still want to work with their hands. Maybe retired folks with skills no one's asking for anymore. A place to fix things. Talk. Leave something better behind." She was quiet. Then her lips curled into a smile that made his chest feel too full. "I think Walter would have liked that," she said. "I think he would have been terrified of it." Daniel laughed. "But yeah, maybe he would have." The rest of the day passed in that kind of rhythm, gentle but purposeful. Marianne sorted tools, naming them aloud, as she worked half to herself, half to Daniel. He liked the sound of her voice moving through the garage. Lucas arrived just before lunch, holding a thick envelope in one hand. His face was unreadable. "Mind if we sit?" he asked. They settled at the folding table, now cleared of rusted screws and coffee mugs. Lucas opened the envelope and spread the documents across the table. "Found the deed to Ruth's old house," he said. "Turns out it passed through Walter's name once, briefly. No one noticed. It was buried in some trust paperwork." Daniel leaned in. "Why would he do that, my guess?" Lucas said, tapping the page. "He was trying to keep Ruth and me afloat. Quietly. Discreetly. No one would have looked for his name on a property out in Silverbrook. But it's there. For exactly 3 years. Marianne studied the document. That must have been when Ruth stopped working full-time at the diner. People said she got a mysterious inheritance. Lucas exhaled. He was there, all along. Just silent. Daniel looked at the paperwork, then at Lucas. What do you want to do with it? Lucas hesitated. I want to sell the house, take whatever it brings in and start a scholarship fund. Something small, trade school focused, for kids like me. Like Ruth. Daniel felt something catch in his chest. That's a damn good idea, he said. Lucas met his eyes. You sure I've never been more sure? Later that evening, as they packed up the documents, Daniel caught sight of Abby watching from the threshold. She stepped forward. Can I help? Lucas smiled. You already are. That night, the three of them, Daniel, Abby, and Marianne, stood in the middle of the garage under a single hanging bulb. The air smelled of dust, wood polish, and whatever hope was made of. Marianne held an old photograph of Walter and Ruth. She'd framed it with leftover scrap wood and glass from her shop. Daniel took it in his hands, then walked to the back wall. With a small nail and a careful hand, he hung it just above the old workbench. For a moment they stood in silence. Then Abby whispered, "It looks like they belong here." Daniel nodded, voice thick. "They do." He turned to Marianne. "This place, you were right. It's more than walls." She stepped closer. "So are you." Their eyes met. Daniel didn't look away. He didn't need to. And somewhere deep inside the old garage, where memory met mercy, something shifted for good. The following week moved slower, like the town itself had taken a breath. Spring rain began to fall in long, steady streaks that softened the edges of everything: rooftops, sidewalks, memories. Daniel sat in the garage with the bay door open, the scent of damp earth rolling in. He was sanding down an old shelf board from the back room, smoothing it clean, when Marianne's voice drifted in behind him. Still determined to refinish every piece of wood in this place, he looked up, smiling. One board at a time. She walked in with a bag from the local hardware store, her scarf damp around her neck. "I picked up the drawer handles you asked for, and I brought pie, because some people forget to eat when they get too focused. Pie always wins," he said, setting the sander aside. They sat on upturned crates with the pie between them, cherry still warm from Marianne's oven. Daniel watched the steam rise from his slice, then glanced at her. "Do you ever think about how strange all this is?" he asked. "You mean inheriting a garage full of secrets, reconnecting with people you barely knew, and trying to build a future from pieces of the past?" He laughed. "Exactly." Marianne's tone softened. "I think it's the most honest kind of strange. Messy, real, worth the effort." Daniel nodded, quiet for a beat. "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve any of this." She looked at him, eyes steady. "You don't have to earn love, Daniel. Not the real kind. You just have to show up for it." Before he could respond, a knock echoed from the open garage door. Abby stood just outside, flanked by a woman Daniel hadn't seen in years, Angela Firth, his ex-wife's younger sister. She wore a slate-gray trench coat and carried herself like someone with something rehearsed to say. Abby looked uneasy. She showed up at school, asked the front desk for me. Daniel's back straightened. Why? Angela stepped forward. "I came because I heard what you were doing here. The garage. The scholarship fund. Your name's come up in city council meetings." Daniel narrowed his eyes, and Angela hesitated. "People are watching you, and I thought maybe Abby should come stay with me for a while." Silence, thick, immediate. Abby's voice was sharp. "What I mean it gently," Angela said. "You're juggling a lot, and she's about to start applying for colleges. She needs structure, less distraction." Daniel rose slowly. "I give her structure. I give her everything I've got." Angela looked around the garage like it was proof of his instability. "You're working on a legacy, Daniel." but she's still growing up. Abby stepped forward, voice trembling. You don't get to walk in and offer help like you've been around. You left, Mom left, my dad stayed. Angela's face flushed. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? Abby snapped. Because it sounds like you're saying I'd be better off with a stranger. Daniel put a hand on Abby's shoulder. Go inside the house, honey. She looked at him, eyes wet, jaw clenched, then turned and walked away. The door clicked shut behind her. Daniel turned back to Angela, voice low. You have every right to be concerned. But if you had questions, you should have come to me, not cornered her at school. Angela shifted, suddenly unsure. She's important to me, too. Then treat her like she matters, Daniel said, not like a pawn in someone else's concern. Angela stood quiet for a moment, then turned her heels, tapping a retreat down the driveway. Marianne stayed silent beside him. Finally, Daniel sank onto the crate again, shoulders tight. That caught me off guard, he admitted. She's not wrong to care, Marianne said. But she's wrong about you. Daniel looked at the empty space where Angela had stood. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to outrun the man I used to be. I keep asking if I'm enough now. You are, Marianne said softly, even when it doesn't feel like it. A long pause settled between them. Rain tapped louder on the roof. Then Daniel asked quieter, What happens when someone else decides that for you? Marianne turned toward him, voice steady. Then you fight for what matters, with every good and honest piece of yourself. That night, Daniel knocked gently on Abby's door. She was curled on her bed, hoodie pulled over her head, a journal open on her lap. He sat beside her, not speaking at first. I'm sorry she showed up like that, he finally said. I don't need her, Abby whispered. I have you. Daniel's throat tightened. I know I don't always get it right, but everything I'm doing here, it's for us. She turned to him. Then don't let them take it away. I won't, he said, brushing her hair back gently. I promise. After she fell asleep, Daniel stepped onto the porch heart, still full of noise. The sky was clearing stars, just starting to peek through. He pulled his phone from his pocket and called a lawyer. Hi, this is Daniel Mercer. I need to talk about securing full legal guardianship of my daughter. Tonight, if possible. Because this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about protecting the future. It was just after 7 a.m. when Daniel pulled into the quiet lot behind City Hall, the gravel crunching beneath his tires in the soft gray light of morning. The legal forms sat on the passenger seat, printed and highlighted the pages weighted down with a heavy black pen he hadn't used since the day he signed his divorce papers. Now it was here again, this time for something he chose. For Abby. He shut off the engine and sat for a moment watching the building breathe in the morning fog. His stomach turned not from doubt, but from the weight of doing something that mattered. Truly mattered. Inside the building was still sleepy. The receptionist offered a warm nod and pointed him toward the clerk's office. Daniel handed over the forms, every signature carefully placed, every blank filled in. The clerk scanned them quickly, nodding as he moved through the pages. We'll need a hearing to finalize, he said. 2 weeks from Friday. Standard procedure. Daniel exhaled. And until then, you're listed as the sole custodial parent. That holds. But the judge will want testimony. Daniel nodded. I'll be ready. When he stepped back outside, the morning had begun to break open sunlight, pushing through the clouds, painting the sidewalks in soft gold. He called Marianne without thinking. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, everything okay? I filed the guardianship papers. There was a pause. Then Daniel, that's huge. I didn't want to wait for someone else to decide what's best for her. I already know. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice warm. "You did the hard thing." He leaned against the truck, letting her voice settle into his chest. "Feels like we're always doing the hard thing lately. Maybe that's how you know it's real." Later that day, Lucas showed up at the garage holding a cardboard tube under one arm and wearing a grin that made Daniel suspicious. "I brought you something," he said, setting the tube on the workbench. Daniel unrolled it carefully, an original blueprint of the garage dated 1952. At the top, in faded pencil, was Walter's name. "Where did you get this? The county archives. It was stuffed in a box labeled miscellaneous permits. Thought you'd want to see how this place was first imagined." Daniel traced a finger along the layout. There was the bay, the back room, even a side entry that had long been sealed shut. Lucas pointed at a small mark in the corner. "That space there, it's labeled caretaker's room." Daniel frowned. "I didn't know there was one. I don't think anyone did, but I think Walter used it for storage." Curiosity pulled them to the back, past the piles Daniel had only half cleared. Behind an old metal cabinet and a stack of oil cans, they found an old wooden door paint peeling nearly invisible in the dim light. It creaked open. The room was small, dusty, a narrow cot against one wall, a shelf of faded paperbacks, and in the far corner, a wooden chest. Lucas stepped back. "You want to do the honors?" Daniel crouched, heart thudding. The chest opened with a groan, revealing a box of letters, several notebooks, and a small velvet pouch. He pulled the pouch out and opened it slowly. Inside was a delicate gold necklace, the pendant shaped like a key. Lucas leaned over. "Do you think it's—" Daniel nodded slowly. "Ruth's. Probably." Beneath the pouch was a photograph, Ruth standing in front of the garage, smiling, holding a baby. But what caught Daniel's eye was the name scrawled on the back, Elijah. March 1989. He looked up at Lucas. "That's not your name." Lucas shook his head. "No, it's not." Daniel stared at the photo again. What if Walter had another child? Lucas blinked. "That would make them my half-sibling, and maybe your half-brother." The air shifted. "Do you think he knew?" Lucas asked. "I think he knew everything. Just never told anyone." That evening, Daniel sat on the porch with Marianne as the sun sank low behind the trees. He told her everything about the blueprint, the caretaker's room, the necklace, the name on the photo. She listened quietly, one hand wrapped around her tea, the other resting gently on his. "There's always more to uncover with Walter," she said. "I'm starting to think the garage wasn't just a place he left us," Daniel said. "It was a story he couldn't finish. So he left the pages for us to write." She looked at him, eyes soft. "And what about your own story?" Daniel turned toward her, the question hanging in the air. "I think this," he gestured to the house. "The garage, the porch beneath them is where it finally starts to make sense." She leaned in just enough to close the space between them. Her hand brushed his cheek. "You've come a long way from the man who walked into that garage alone." "I'm still that man," he whispered. "Just less alone now." Their lips met, not rushed, not rehearsed, just quiet and steady and sure. When they pulled apart, Marianne's smile said everything he couldn't. Inside, Abby watched from her bedroom window, a small smile curving her lips. For the first time in a long time, things felt like they were coming together. Not perfectly, but honestly. And for this family, whatever shape it took next, that was more than enough. Daniel hadn't planned on opening the garage that Saturday. Rain came down in sheets, and the air had the kind of chill that sunk through your jacket and settled in your bones. But something pulled him there anyway, a quiet nudge, the kind that whispered, "You're not done yet." He flicked on the lights, one row at a time, until the place glowed like a memory. Dust swirled in the beams, the scent of oil and cedar thick in the air. The blueprint was still pinned to the wall. The photo of Ruth and Elijah rested on the workbench, waiting. He ran a hand through his hair, still damp from the rain. So much had changed since he walked into this garage that first day, still wearing grief like a second skin. And yet, there were questions he couldn't shake. Things Walter had hidden. A second child. A missing piece of family history. He heard the familiar hum of Marianne's car pulling into the gravel. She stepped in with a thermos and a cautious smile. "You didn't answer my text." "I know," he said, wiping his hands. "I wasn't sure I had the right words." "You don't need perfect words," she said gently. "You just need real ones." Daniel gestured to the photo. "Do you think he's still out there?" "Elijah." She stepped closer. "If he is, he's carrying a story he doesn't even know he's a part of." Daniel nodded, then sat on the stool, elbows resting on the workbench. "I've been thinking, if Walter had another child, maybe they're the reason he kept this place alive so long. Maybe he was waiting for something to bring all the pieces together." Marianne poured 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "And now I think it's my turn to carry it forward." Before she could answer, the side door creaked open. Abby stepped in, rain dripping from her jacket, hood cheeks flushed from the cold. "Hey," she said, pulling the hood down. "You're both here." Daniel raised a brow. "Everything okay?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack. "I wanted to show you something." She handed it over. It was a college essay, titled "The Garage That Built Me." Daniel blinked. "You finished it?" "I rewrote it," she said, voice softer now. "After everything that's happened, I realize this place isn't just a garage, it's part of who I am. Who we are." He read the first few lines aloud, voice catching. "Most kids grow up with swing sets and family dinners. I grew up with sockets, rusted bolts, and a father who learned to fix more than just broken engines. He fixed us one piece at a time." He couldn't finish. Abby reached for his hand. "I just thought you should see it before I submit." He wrapped her in a hug, silent for a long moment. Marianne blinked back, tears brushing one away before it could fall. "That's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard." Abby smiled, a little embarrassed but proud. They stood together, the three of them, in a space that no longer felt haunted but blessed. Not perfect, but full of grace. And just when the quiet settled in again, the phone rang. Daniel stared at it, confused. No one ever called the landline. He crossed the room and picked it up. Mercer's garage. A pause. Then a man's voice. Nervous. Curious. "Hi. I know this might be strange, but I think I found something that belongs to your family. My name's Elijah." Daniel's hand tightened around the receiver. I was going through some of my mother's things after she passed," the voice continued. "She left me a letter. It mentioned a Walter Mercer and a garage in Minnesota. Said if I ever felt lost, I should start there." Daniel met Marianne's eyes. "You're calling from where Billings, Montana," the voice said. "I'm not asking for anything. I feel like I've been missing something my whole life. And I don't know why." Daniel's voice was quiet. "You said your name is Elijah, yes. Elijah Carr." He turned toward Abby, who watched him wide-eyed. Marianne placed a hand on his arm. He swallowed, then spoke with as much steadiness as he could find. "Elijah, this might sound strange to you too, but I think you just found what you've been missing." A long pause. Then, "Is this Walter's garage?" It was Daniel said. "Now it's ours. All of ours." On the other end of the line, the man exhaled. "I think I'd like to see it, if that's okay." Daniel's voice cracked just slightly. It's more than okay. It's time. After the call ended, he turned to Abby and Marianne. The air around them buzzed, not with nerves, but with something quieter. Hope. Wonder. "We're not done," Daniel said. "We're just getting started." Abby smiled through her tears. "Do you think he'll come?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I think he will." Marianne stepped closer, threading her fingers through his. "And when he does, we'll be ready." Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. And inside that old garage where history met, healing the story kept unfolding one heartbeat at a time. Elijah arrived on a Thursday just before sunset. Daniel stood at the front of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag the same way his grandfather used to. He heard the gravel shift before he saw the car, a beat-up maroon Honda that had seen better years but made the trip from Montana with stubborn grace. It rolled to a quiet stop at the edge of the lot. The man who stepped out wasn't what Daniel expected. He looked younger than him, by maybe 5 years, tall, wiry, with soft eyes that held a kind of guarded kindness. He wore a canvas jacket, a faded t-shirt, and the look of someone who hadn't had a proper night's sleep in a while. They stood facing each other for a beat too long. Then Daniel stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Elijah." The man nodded slowly. "Daniel." They shook hands, not firm, not hesitant, just steady. "I wasn't sure you'd really come," Daniel said. Elijah let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "I wasn't sure either. But the letter, it said this place would answer questions I didn't even know to ask." Daniel nodded toward the garage. "Let's see if that's true." They walked in together, the scent of old pine and engine oil rising to meet them. Abby was already inside, nervously adjusting the books on the small community shelf they'd set up in the back corner. When she looked up and saw Elijah, she smiled, then gave Daniel a look. "Is this him?" He nodded. "Hi," Abby said gently. "I'm Abby." Elijah's face softened. "Hey, Abby. I've heard a little about you." Marianne stepped in from the back, wiping her hands on a shop towel. Her gaze landed on Elijah, and her voice caught for a second before smoothing out. "You made it. I did," Elijah said. "Though I still don't really know what I'm walking into. You're not the only one." Daniel said, rubbing the back of his neck. "To be honest, we've been learning as we go." They sat around the old workbench, coffee brewing on the hot plate. Daniel pulled out the letter from Walter, the one they'd found in the caretaker's room, and laid it on the table. Elijah leaned in, reading silently. When he got to the end, he didn't speak right away. "I always wondered why she never talked about him," Elijah said finally. "My mom, I mean. She mentioned a garage once. Said there was a man who helped her once when no one else did." Daniel glanced at Marianne, who gave him a quiet nod. Let him talk. "I didn't have a dad growing up," Elijah said. "Or, well, I did. But not in the real way. He left when I was little. My mom, she was kind but tired. Always tired." He looked around the garage like he was trying to see the past still living in the corners. "She never wanted to talk about where I came from. Just that we had what we needed, and that was enough." Daniel slid the photo across the table, the one of Ruth holding a baby outside the garage. "We think this is you." Elijah stared at it. His eyes moved slowly over Ruth's face, then the child, then the scrawl on the back. He touched the edge of the paper like it was something sacred. "I always thought there was a part of me that didn't quite fit anywhere," he whispered. "Maybe now I know why." The room sat with his words. Daniel cleared his throat. "We don't know the full story. We probably never will. But we think Walter knew. About you. About Ruth keeping you safe. And I think he paused, voice hitching. I think he wanted us to find each other. Elijah looked up. But why now? Abby leaned forward, her voice soft but clear. Because we're ready now. To do something with it. Not just look back, but move forward together. Something in Elijah's eyes broke. Then not in a painful way, but in that full, breathless way people do when they feel seen for the first time in a long time. He nodded slowly. Okay. So, what now? Daniel reached for the velvet pouch and placed it in Elijah's hand. This belonged to Ruth. Walter kept it. I think he was saving it for you. Elijah opened it carefully. The gold necklace rested inside, delicate and simple. His voice was barely audible. She wore this every Sunday. I remember. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, Marianne said gently. Elijah smiled, eyes still glassy. Good. Because I don't even know where to begin. You already did, Daniel said. You showed up. Outside, the wind shifted. The rain had passed, and the last streaks of golden light spilled across the driveway. They stepped out onto the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. Elijah stood beside Daniel. They watched the sky settle into its final colors. You know, Elijah said, I'm not even sure what we are. Brothers, cousins. Strangers who share a story, Daniel thought for a moment. Then he said, we're what we decide to be. Starting now. And in that quiet moment, without a single signature, without a blood test, without any explanation that could satisfy a lifetime of questions, it was enough. It was the turning point. A week passed like a slow breath. The garage, once just a place full of rusted tools and regret, now buzzed with quiet energy. It had become something more, an anchor, a mirror, a bridge. Elijah didn't leave. Not right away. He stayed in the guest room at Daniel's house, the one Abby had helped clean out back in March when they first started making space for new things. Now it had a fresh set of sheets, a desk, and a sense that maybe this was what it meant to belong somewhere again. Daniel noticed the way Abby opened up around Elijah, cautiously, at first, then more easily. They talked about music, old family recipes, what it felt like to grow up not quite knowing where you came from. Abby had questions. Elijah didn't always have answers, but he never shut her out. And that mattered more. Marianne visited often, usually carrying 2 coffees and a smile that lingered a little longer on Daniel each time. She helped them organize the scholarship details, adding suggestions on how to partner with local schools and trade unions. She didn't ask for credit. Just leaned in quietly, steadily, like she always had. One evening, Daniel found himself sitting alone in the garage, staring at the photo of Walter, Ruth, and baby Elijah again. The corners had curled a little. It looked older now, but somehow more alive. He heard soft footsteps, and looked up to see Marianne walking toward him, coat unbuttoned, cheeks pink from the wind. Cold out tonight? She said, settling beside him on the workbench. Daniel nodded. But it's clear, stars are out. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Then he turned toward her. You ever wonder what Walter would think of all this? She smiled gently. All the time. Daniel traced the rim of his coffee mug. You think he meant for us to find each other? Me, Elijah, Abby? Even you. Marianne tilted her head. I think Walter wasn't great at words, but he knew how to leave clues, pieces, and maybe he trusted that someone would finally care enough to put them together. Daniel breathed out slowly. I used to think love was about big declarations, fireworks, but maybe it's just this, showing up, staying through the hard parts. Marianne looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. That's the only kind of love that lasts. Daniel leaned in, not rushed, not hesitant, just sure. Their lips met again, this time longer, warmer, with the weight of everything behind it and the hope of everything ahead. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. You always talk like you're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I am, he admitted. But lately, I'm not afraid of what happens if it does. Good, she said, her voice like a promise. Because I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, Elijah stood in the middle of the garage holding a notebook. He cleared his throat. So I've been thinking. This place doesn't just need to be about the past. We've got the space, the tools, the people. What if we actually made it into a working community shop classes projects mentorship? Daniel looked at him. Like a co-op? Yeah. But with heart. You said it yourself, this place should be for more than memories. Daniel smiled. Let's do it. By the afternoon, Abby was painting a new sign with Marianne Mercer's Garage, restoring more than just engines. They hung it above the bay doors together. As the sun dropped low in the sky, casting long amber shadows across the lot, people started arriving. Friends from town. Lucas, the high school shop teacher, a few neighbors who hadn't stepped foot in the place since Walter passed. One woman brought lemon bars. Another brought an old photograph of her father working at the shop in 1963. There was no grand speech, just warmth. Quiet music playing on a borrowed Bluetooth speaker. Laughter that felt easy. Daniel stood near the entrance, watching it all unfold. Marianne slipped her hand into his. Abby leaned her head on his shoulder. And Elijah. He stood across the room, arms crossed, watching Daniel with a look that said everything. We made it. This was the family they'd built. Not perfect, not planned, but honest. Daniel closed his eyes just for a second. He heard Walter's voice in his memory, gruff, tired, but steady. Fix what you can, son. And for the rest, be the kind of man who stays anyway. He opened his eyes. I'm staying, he whispered to no one and everyone. And this time he meant it. Rain returned to the town the next morning. Not a hard storm, just a steady, rhythmic drizzle that made everything feel slower, softer. The garage remained open, the smell of fresh paint mixing with damp concrete. Inside, the hum of energy still lingered from the night before, like the walls were holding on to every word spoken, every hand shaken, every laugh shared. Daniel stood at the workbench, sorting through a box of old receipts and ledgers. Walter had kept the edges curling with time. Each one told a quiet story of services rendered, favors traded, late payments forgiven. Walter hadn't just run a garage. He'd run a life support system for the community. Need help with those? Marianne's voice came from behind him, gentle and familiar. He turned, smiling. You just can't stay away, can you? She shrugged, stepping closer. What can I say? I've got a soft spot for stubborn men and half-finished stories. He chuckled, setting the box aside. I think the story's starting to write itself now. Marianne reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This came to the library yesterday. Addressed to you. He took it carefully, unfolding it to reveal a handwritten note. Daniel. I heard about what you're doing with the garage. I don't know if you remember me. My name's Cliff Randall. I worked for your grandfather back in the late 80s, before things got complicated. Walter helped me through the worst time in my life. I owe him more than I ever said. I'd like to come by, pay my respects, maybe tell you a few things I think you deserve to know. I'll be passing through next week. Hope that's okay. Cliff. Daniel read it twice, then lowered it slowly. Did you know him? Marianne nodded. Only by name. My dad mentioned him once, said he left town suddenly, and no one ever explained why. Daniel felt a familiar twist in his stomach. There's always more, isn't there? Always another piece. Marianne placed a hand on his. Maybe it's not about finding every answer. Maybe it's about being willing to hear the ones that finally come. He nodded, through the weight of unknowns still pressed behind his ribs. Just then, Elijah stepped in, shaking off an umbrella. His face was a little pale, eyes tired. Daniel raised a brow. "You okay?" Elijah hesitated. "Yeah, just had a weird call this morning." Marianne tilted her head. "From who? My mom's cousin. She said there might be another letter, something my mom hid in a photo album." He took a breath. She's mailing it. Daniel could see the question hanging in his eyes, the same question he had been asking himself for weeks. How much more did Walter know, and what did Ruth choose not to say? "Whatever's in that letter," Daniel said quietly, "we'll face it together." Elijah nodded, swallowing hard. "Thanks." A knock interrupted them. Abby standing at the garage door holding an envelope. "Dad," she said, eyes wide. "It's from the state, about the guardianship hearing." Daniel reached for it with hands that were suddenly not so steady. He opened it slowly, reading the lines twice before looking up. "It's approved," he whispered. "I'm her full legal guardian now." Abby stepped in, burying her face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her and held on tight, letting the moment wash over them. Marianne and Elijah gave them space, but they watched with quiet smiles, knowing what it had taken to get here. Later, when things had settled and the garage lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, the four of them sat around the old wooden table near the back wall. Daniel cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about the scholarship. I want to name it after Walter and Ruth." Marianne smiled. "That's perfect." And Daniel added, glancing at Elijah, "We include a note in every application packet, about the garage, about the legacy, about second chances." Elijah nodded, emotion flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, I like that." The rain picked up outside, tapping steadily against the roof, like a memory finding its rhythm. Abby looked around the table. "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" Mom Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes, I do." And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he wasn't chasing after forgiveness. He was standing inside of it. The story wasn't finished. But the people writing it, they weren't running anymore. Cliff Randall arrived just after noon on Tuesday, driving an old turquoise pickup that looked like it had survived more than a few winters and stubborn Midwestern summers. Daniel stood by the garage door, watching the man step out with a hesitant grace, like he wasn't sure if this was a reunion or an apology. Cliff was in his 60s, wiry silver hair pulled into a short ponytail, jeans faded flannel tucked in, but crooked. He looked like someone who had lived too many lives in too many towns and still carried the weight of the ones he left behind. "You must be Daniel Cliff," said voice gravelly but not unkind. Daniel stepped forward and shook his hand. "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure I'd actually do it." Cliff glanced around. "This place looks different. It's changing," Daniel said. "And maybe it's about time." Inside, they sat at the same workbench that had become the family's gathering point. Elijah and Marianne joined them, quiet but curious. Abby lingered nearby, pretending to reorganize tools but listening closely. Cliff reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. "This was mine," he said, sliding it across the table. "Walter gave it to me the day I left. Said to open it when I was ready." Daniel stared at the envelope. It was sealed in wax, the stamp still holding strong after all these years. "I never opened it," Cliff continued. "Thought it'd be better to forget. But now, seems like maybe forgetting wasn't the point." Daniel looked at him. "Why'd you leave?" Cliff ran a hand down his face. "I was young, broke, angry. Walter gave me a job, a cot in the caretaker's room, and didn't ask questions. He had this way of seeing people even when they didn't want to be seen." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sounds familiar. One night I messed up. Real bad. Took a customer's truck out, didn't come back till morning. Thought for sure he'd fire me." Cliff paused. "He didn't." Marianne leaned in. "What did he do?" Cliff smiled faintly. "He made me coffee, sat me down, said, 'You've got one foot in the fire, kid. Pull the other out before you burn for good.' Then he gave me that letter. Told me if I couldn't stay, I better not run forever either." Daniel picked up the envelope. The wax cracked gently as he opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper. His grandfather's handwriting was rough but deliberate. "Cliff, you don't owe me anything. But someday when the noise quiets down and you remember who you really are, come back. There's always room here for someone who's willing to build again. W." Silence filled the room. Cliff blinked hard, then laughed softly, more breath than sound. "Man knew how to write, huh?" Elijah finally spoke. "Sounds like he forgave you before you even asked." Cliff looked down. "Yeah. And I've been carrying that silence for 30 years. Daniel reached out and set a hand on the letter. "Well, maybe it's time to build again." The words hung there. Later, Daniel walked Cliff through the garage, showing him the renovations, the scholarship plans the community board covered in notes and photos. When they reached the back wall, where the blueprint still hung beside Ruth's picture, Cliff stopped. "That's her," he whispered. "She used to bring me lunch when I worked late. Called me kiddo, even though I was 21. You knew Ruth." Cliff nodded. "She was kind, real kind. Like the world hadn't hardened her yet. You could tell she loved someone she couldn't talk about." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Do you think that someone was Walter?" "I don't think," Cliff said softly. "I know." He paused. "One night I caught them sitting in the bay just talking. Nothing scandalous. Just two people who loved each other more than life made room for." Daniel looked at the photo again, Ruth holding Elijah the garage in the background. "She must have had reasons," Daniel said. "We all do," Cliff replied. "But that doesn't mean the story ends there." As they stood in that quiet, oil-scented space, Daniel realized something. It wasn't about solving every mystery. It was about honoring the people who tried to do their best with what they had, who built something, anything, in the face of mess and doubt. When Cliff left that evening, he did so with a small box of tools from the garage, a picture of Walter, and the promise to return next month to teach welding to a group of high school kids. "You sure about this?" Daniel had asked. Cliff had smiled. "I think Walter would have liked that ending better than the one I gave him." As the sky deepened into twilight, Daniel locked up the garage and stepped outside, where Marianne waited on the porch swing blanket wrapped around her knees. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Well?" she asked. Daniel took a breath. "I think we're closer to the truth. Not all of it, but enough." She turned her head to look at him. "That's all most of us get. Just enough." The wind picked up, rustling the trees overhead, and somewhere in the distance a church bell rang out, slow, low, and full of time. Daniel leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Not to forget, but to remember more clearly. Autumn settled over the town like a warm quilt, wrapping the trees in shades of gold and rust. The air had that unmistakable crispness, where every breath reminded you that change was happening, even if it was slow, even if you couldn't always see it. Mercer's garage stood quiet in the early morning. A soft fog hugged the gravel lot. Inside, the scent of sawdust and brewed coffee mingled as Daniel leaned over the workbench, sorting through applications for the new community program they were launching, Rebuild and Rise, a hands-on mentorship for teens learning restoration work. The bell above the front door jingled. Abby stepped in, bundled in a hoodie, holding a cup of hot cider. "You're up early." Daniel smiled, eyes tired but calm. "Couldn't sleep. Too much spinning in my head." She slid the cider toward him, and sat on the edge of the workbench. "The board looks good." She nodded toward the cork wall, now pinned with photos, Walter Ruth old repair orders, newspaper clippings, and smiling faces from their first community night. Feels like it's alive now. Like it's breathing. He looked over at it, a quiet ache in his chest. It is. She hesitated, then pulled a folded letter from her jacket. This came yesterday. From Montana. He took it slowly, recognizing the handwriting. Elijah. The letter was short. Dan found the second letter Mom left. Turns out she had written to Walter but never sent it. Said she was scared of opening old wounds, but in it, she called him the only man who ever made her feel safe. She never stopped loving him. I'm heading back to Billings for a while, just to get my footing. But this place, this family, it's home. I'll be back soon. Thank you. For everything. E. Daniel folded it carefully and slid it into the drawer marked personal. He looked at Abby. Think we'll ever be able to tell the whole story, he asked. She grinned. Maybe. But I think the best ones aren't told all at once. Later that afternoon, a soft knock came at the garage's side door. Marianne stood there holding a small tin box. I found this behind the reference desk, she said, stepping in. It must have slipped behind the shelving. Daniel opened the tin gently. Inside was a faded black and white photo of Walter, in his 20s, grinning beside a classic Chevy grease on his cheeks. Beneath it, a worn ribbon. And under that, a note. To whoever keeps the lights on after me, thank you. Don't forget to make room for Joy. Daniel stared at it, then looked at Marianne. He knew this place would outlast him. She nodded. He just didn't know who would carry it next. They sat quietly, the weight of legacy and love settling like dust in the warm light. Come to dinner tonight, she asked softly. He reached for her hand. Only if I can bring dessert. She laughed. Apple pie peach cobbler. Marianne grinned. Deal. That evening, Daniel, Marianne, and Abby walked to the old community center, now repainted and revived with help from the garage crew. Tables lined with candles and covered dishes filled the space with warmth. Kids ran past in costumes from a fall festival. Neighbors old and new gathered like they belonged. Daniel made a quiet toast after dinner. To second chances. And to the people who help us find them. As applause filled the room, he caught Abby's gaze across the table. Her eyes shimmered not just with pride, but with peace. When the night wound down, Daniel stepped outside, letting the cool air hit his face. He looked up at the stars. Somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the silence, he imagined Walter standing with Ruth, watching everything unfold. Maybe smiling, maybe at peace. Abby joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. You did good, Dad. He didn't answer right away, just leaned in and held her hand. I didn't fix everything he said, finally. She shook her head. No, but you showed up. You stayed. A pause. And you loved us through it. He closed his eyes, holding on to that. This garage wasn't about engines anymore. It was about rebuilding lives, about forgiveness, about choosing love over and over, even when it was hard, even when it took years, especially then. As they walked home together, laughter echoing behind them, Daniel felt something lift, like the past had finally made peace with the present. And as the porch light flickered on ahead, guiding them back, he knew they were never lost. They were always just on their way home.